Quais são as forças que influenciam nosso comportamento? Por que tantas vezes deixamos de agir em nosso próprio interesse? Autor de inúmeros livros, ele mantém uma coluna no Wall Street Journal, o Ask Ariely, onde se dedica a responder a essas e outras perguntas, a fim de ajudar as pessoas a viverem vidas mais sensatas. Agora com vocês, mais um mestre aqui na ExpertXP 2020, Dana Ariely.
Hi, my name is Dan Ariely, and I'm the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics. And today I want to talk a little bit about what I have been doing in the Corona crisis from the social science perspective, and a couple of general lessons about human nature and COVID crisis and what do we do with that. But before I start, you might have noticed that I have half a beard, so let me explain why. Many years ago I was badly burned. Most of my body is covered with scars, including the right side of my face, so I just don't have hair on this side. There's no real point to this half a beard, that's just how the accident happened. Okay, so let's think a little bit about COVID crisis and social science. So the COVID crisis started as a crisis in biology. There's a virus, that's obviously the main issue. But it became a crisis of the economy, and it became a crisis that draws heavily on social science. Why? Because we need people to behave in a different way. And unless we understand how people behave, we're not going to create effective behavioral change policies. You know, every time we create a policy, it's because we want people to behave differently. And if we don't understand people, how can the policies be effective? So in March, I was sitting in my office at Duke, North Carolina, and I started getting more calls from the Israeli government asking all kinds of questions. So eventually I took a flight and I showed up here, and for the next 3 months I was just working on things related to the COVID crisis. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In the beginning, the question was, how do we give instructions in a way that people could adhere to them? And it sounds like a very simple question. How do we give instructions? Just tell people what to do. Well, it turns out it's not that simple. When you tell lots of people what to do, you don't need just for them to know what to do, it also needs to be clear. They also need to understand what they do if they violate the rules. You know, in dieting, there's something called the what the hell effect. If you've ever been on a diet, you might know this effect. You're on a strict diet, and one day you start the morning and you eat a muffin. And then you say to yourself, I'm not a dieter today, let me enjoy a milkshake, fries, and a hamburger. By the way, this is not how nature counts calories, but this is how we count calories. If there's a day that we violate the rules, we say, today I'm not a dieter, I'll start next Monday. The same thing was true about the COVID instructions. What if we violate the instructions? What if we meet 2 people? Can we now go ahead and meet more people? What if we left our home? Can we now go and visit lots of places? And then finally there were questions about how do we make this desirable? How do we not make it just the rule, but also something that people think is the right thing to do? Think about something like texting and driving. Texting and driving is an example that people know the rule and know the danger, but everybody is doing it. So we don't feel bad doing that as well. Anyway, so there's lots of questions about even something simple like how to give instructions became very complex. Other questions had to do with education. Education is basically about human motivation. It's about motivation of the kids. It's about motivation of the teachers. It's about motivation of the parents, the principals. How do you create motivation when you don't have a classroom? In a classroom, the teacher can sit and they can monitor the kids. You need a very different kind of motivation. What happens when the kids are alone? How do you now use motivation? By the way, motivation is really interesting because there's lots of things that can motivate people. Think about something like running a marathon. Nobody would say that running a marathon is fun. And nobody runs a marathon and laughs in the middle. But marathon gives people lots of other senses of motivation. They give people a sense of accomplishment, connection to ancient Greece, overcoming challenges, working in a team, bettering ourselves, all kinds of things like that. It turns out that those sources of motivation can also apply to education. And all of a sudden, with COVID crisis, when there was not the teacher to monitor, we saw that schools and teachers and kids and parents that were able to allow the kid, here's your challenge, here's your motivation, overcome this, study it by yourself, really flourished. And people that were trying to use the old type of motivation, sit here and do this because I tell you, actually didn't gain much. By the way, the issues with education were so interesting because we could have added motivational factors to school for many, many years. We didn't because we didn't have to. So we settled for instruction that forces the kids to do something. Now that we didn't, we understood the extent to which we need to improve motivations of kids and teachers and parents, and maybe we'll make some steps forward. And then, of course, there were real questions about how you incentivize the market. How do you get money out to the market in a way that would create effects? And I'll give you an example from the US. In the 2007-2008 crisis, both President Bush and President Obama gave lots of money to Americans. But President Bush gave it by giving people a tax refund. Here is your check of your tax refund. And President Obama did it by reducing taxes a little bit, so people's paycheck was slightly higher. It turns out none of those methods worked. None of them really got people to spend more money in the economy, which is what we wanted. Why? Because President Bush's method gave people a check, but he told them it's your money, it's your refund. So people deposited in their checking account and said, it's my money, I'm not spending it. And President Obama, his approach was to basically give people a slightly larger check every month, but they never felt richer because it was a small amount. One of the things we tested was to give people a prepaid debit card. Why is that better? Because now people can't put it in their checking account. It's money that they get on this card. It's separate. And you know what? If you write on it, spend the government's money, people spend it even faster. And the third thing is if you ask people, you can't force people, but say, please use it on American made. A lot of them did that. Right? So the point is that there's lots of ways to put money back into the economy in ways that are ineffective. And there are ways to put money into the economy in ways that will be effective and will galvanize the economy. There are many more things that we did during the COVID crisis. We tracked people, we reported it, we tried to help, all kinds of things. But the point is that in many, many ways, we want to change behavior. In a regular day, we don't always notice all the behaviors we want to change. In crisis, it's incredibly clear, and that's the time when you extra need social science. I think we need social science all the time because even in regular days, we didn't live up to our potential. But after the crisis, it's incredibly clear how much help we need to help people behave in ways that are better. Okay, so that's a little bit of my own history with the COVID crisis. It's of course ongoing, and there's much more work to do. But now what I want to do is I want to talk about a few human challenges and how they reflect in general in our behavior, and particularly in the COVID crisis situation. And the first one I want to talk about is what is called hyperbolic discounting. And hyperbolic discount is the idea we care a lot about the present and we don't care so much about the future. Consider the following case. Imagine that I ask you, how much chocolate would you like? I have half a box of chocolate that you can get right now, or a full box of chocolate that you can get in a week. Half right now, full in a week. And I pass the chocolate around and you could see it and you could smell it. Amazing chocolate, the best chocolate in the world. Half a box now, full box in a week. When you ask people this question, most of them say, give me the half a box of chocolate now. It's not worthwhile for me to wait another week for another half a box of chocolate. Give me the half a box now. Great. To another group of people, you push this to the future. And you say, what would you rather have? a half a box of chocolate in a year or a full box of chocolate in a year and a week? Now, of course, it's the same question. It's asking you whether you're willing to wait another week for another half a box of chocolate. But when it's framed in the present, now versus a week from now, we say, no, 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 I'm not waiting another week. But when it's phrased a year from now, half a box, a year and a week, a full box, say, oh yes, of course, I'm patient. I can wait all the time needed. And that's the issue of hyperbolic discounting, that when something comes close to us, we lose our patience. We want immediate gratification. And that, of course, shows up in many, many ways. It shows up in the fact that we don't sleep enough, that we don't exercise, that we eat too much, that when we drive, we text while driving, don't take our medication, don't wash hands, etc., etc., etc. It, of course, also shows up in savings. Saving is about doing something for the future that is not so much fun right now. And what we do is we say, in principle, I understand that I want to save, but right now, I don't feel like it. So hyperbolic discounting or human impatience is one of the basic human challenges. It derails us in many, many ways. And of course, in the COVID crisis, it derails us in many ways. This is why social distancing is difficult, and why wearing masks is difficult, and why it's difficult for people to stay in quarantine and not go out and work, for example, because they want something now. But for society as a whole, these things are incredibly difficult. And the question is, what can we do about this? And there are all kinds of solutions for self-control challenges, and they include understanding the long-term consequences, committing to the long-term consequences, adding more incentives to act well. For example, if people looked at you, if you texted and drove and people looked at you with a bad, doing something you shouldn't be doing it, or commenting, people can behave better. Now, it's not easy to change our short-term focus to a long-term focus, but we have been successful in some things. For example, with social pressure, we changed smoking quite dramatically. Fun to smoke right now, hard to stop. Social pressure got people to, not everybody, but a lot, stop smoking and behave more in the long term. Automated savings have helped. All kinds of things like that can be used, and we need multiple solutions. So point number one is we have to understand that short-term thinking, what's sometimes called myopic thinking, is a huge human barrier to good behavior with COVID, and we need to figure out how to work on this. How to get people to start saving right now, to reduce consumption if they can't afford it. How do we get people to pay back debt? How do we get people to wear masks, wash their hands, all kinds of things like that. Okay. The second topic I want to mention is the fact that we're all in this together. We're always, all of us are in this together with global warming, the economy, and so on. But COVID-19, it's extra special how clear, how connected we are. And there's a game that is called the public goods game that for me illustrates this to a very large degree. How does this game works? Imagine that you pick 10 people in Brazil. 10 people randomly. You pick in Brazil, they're anonymous, they don't know each other, 10 people. And you basically call them and you say, I'm giving you 100 reais. And you can do two things with this 100 reais. You can either keep it to yourself, or you can put it in a central pot. Keep it to yourself, or put it in a central pot. If you keep it to yourself, you have another 100 reais. If you put it in a central pot, all the money that everybody will put in the central pot will increase 5 times in the evening, equally divided by everybody. That's the game, and you're going to play it for a while. What happens when you play this game? Day number 1, you call people up, you remind them about the rules of the game, and you say, what do you want to do? And everybody puts their money in the central pot. 10 people, 100 reais, we have 1,000 reais. Increases by 5 times, we have 5,000 reais. Everybody, money is equally divided by everybody. everybody has 500, right? And life is good. You wake up with 100, you go to sleep with 500, life is good. And the game continues like this for a while. Wake up with 100, go to sleep with 500, and then one day, one person decides to put 0 in. You have 10 people, 9 of them put all their money, 1 of them keeps their money, right? So 100 real multiply by 9 people, we have 900. Multiply 5 times, we have 4,500. Equally divide by everybody. Everybody gets from the central pot 450. Right? They used to get 500, now they get 450. But the bastard, the person who betrayed the public good, has 550. That person took for themselves, and everybody lost as a consequence. Right? That person decided, my personal benefit is more important. Let me keep my money. They benefited from everybody. Everybody lost, and that person won. Everybody has 450. That person has 550. But here's the question. What happens the next day? Well, either the next day or the day after, everybody puts 0 in. In economics, this game is considered a game with 2 equilibria. There's a good equilibria, that everybody puts all their money in and everybody participates. And there's a bad equilibria where nobody puts any money in and nobody participates. And there's nothing stable in the middle. It's not as if 5 people put in and 5 people don't and this stays like this. No, we can keep the everybody participates or the nobody participates, but the rest of them just move very quickly. And the second thing is that the good equilibria is very fragile. It's enough for one person to deviate that everybody deviates. The bad equilibria is very stable. Imagine that for 3 months nobody's putting money in. Every day people get 100, every day people put 0, and one day 3 people put money in. What happened? Does it move up to everybody putting money in? No. Goes back to 0. Now why am I telling you this game? About this game? What is clear, I think, to all of us is that COVID-19 has shown us how connected we are and how fragile society is. And the good equilibria is an equilibria that nobody is infecting anybody. And that's a really good equilibria. And if actually everybody stayed at home for a month, there would be no more virus. But the moment people betray the public good, imagine somebody wakes up and says, today, I'm not going to adhere to the rules. And they can basically hurt everybody. In a world like taxes, if we have 5% of the people don't pay taxes, we have 5% less taxes. In a pandemic or a virus, if 5% don't adhere to the rules, the outcome is not a 5% reduction. It could be no effectiveness because those people can spread things around in a disproportional way. Now there's one more thing to say about this, which is, imagine somebody from a low income. Let's say it's a person who works on a daily basis and gets paid every day for their work. And one day that person wakes up with fever and coughing, but they have no money. And if they don't go to work today, they'll not have a way to feed their family. What are they going to do? Are they going to stay at home and quarantine themselves to help everybody else? Or are they going to say, I'm going to help my family anyway and I'm going to go ahead and work, even at the risk of infecting other people? And we see that in the data very strongly. We see that people of lower income actually violate the rules much more, to a large degree, because they can't adhere to them. We're not helping them. We're not giving them a security blanket to do that. And as a consequence, they create lots of damage. So what the public good problem tells us is that we're all in this together in a very, very deep way. And we need to figure out how do we stay in the good equilibrium. And we also need to say, the people who violate this, how do we support them to come back up? Is it by a security blanket? Is it by government programs? Is it about local community? Is it with feedback of telling people what to do? Because unless we stay in the good equilibrium, everything deteriorates. 2 days ago, I went to a birthday party. I was the only one with a mask. We were asked very nicely to wear a mask, or even signs. But if 50% of the people don't wear a mask, what are the other people going to do? Well, in this particular case, aside from me, nobody was wearing a mask. And I have to tell you, I felt very stupid. But I'm used to feeling stupid, so it was not that big of a big deal. And the last point I want to talk about is I want to talk a little bit about trust. One of the things that we see with the COVID crisis in many countries is a reduction of trust in the government, and some for bad reasons and some for good reasons. And trust is always very important, right? Countries that have higher trust actually have higher GDP, because if you trust people, there's a lot you can do. Also, trust is very important in COVID-19. If government that can enjoy trust can tell people, trust us, we'll fix this later, even though we don't know what to do now. Countries that don't enjoy trust have a very, very hard time adhering to the rule and doing the right thing. And I want to tell you kind of one maybe example of a trust experiment. So in this experiment, imagine I'm a waiter, and I can be either waiter 1 or waiter 2. When I'm waiter 1, I go to a table, and there's 4 people, and I go to the first person and I say, what would you like? And that person says that they want the fish. And I said, the fish is not so good today, take the chicken. The chicken is cheaper and better, cheaper and better. And that person takes my advice. And then we measure whether the second, third, and fourth person take my advice, and whether the whole table accept my advice for wine. That's waiter 1. Waiter 2, starts the same way. I come and I say, what would you like? And the person says, I want the fish. And I say, the fish is not so good today, take the steak. It's only 3 times more expensive, but it's amazing. How much is the second, third, and fourth person take my advice, and how much the whole table is taking my advice for wine? It turns out not so much. Why? What's the difference between the first waiter and the second waiter? The difference is that the first waiter told us, take something better and cheaper, good for you and worse for me. The waiter basically told us that they are willing to sacrifice something of themselves to help us. And that creates trust, right? If you're looking for trust, you want somebody who cares about you in a real way. The second waiter, we don't know who they worked for. Are they working for themselves? Are they saying, take the steak because it's good for them, or because it's good for us? Now, maybe it's an amazing steak. Maybe that steak would have been the best decision you can make, and you would dream about that steak until the day you die. But you would never know if the waiter is working for you and working for themselves. Whereas the first waiter, you know. And that's one of the things we want to do with trust. In order to gain trust, we need to show people that we care more for them than about us. And you can think about what leaders need to do, right? If leaders of countries are asking us to do all kinds of sacrifices, social, economic sacrifices, we need to trust them. How could they create trust? They need to show us that they care about us more than they care about them. If the COVID-19 rules, instructions, stimulus programs all look like they're helping not us, we're not going to create trust. But if they do, we are going to get much better. And for me, the easiest way to think about where trust could have been great is in tracking people. We have lots of questions about privacy. In general, privacy is better than sharing our data. There's no question about it. But in crises like the one we have right now, sharing data would have been incredibly important. If people opened their phones and allowed governments to understand where are people who are sick, where are people who have symptoms, we could have tracked things much, much better. But guess what? We, in general, don't trust our government. So what do? We don't share the information. Just imagine a world in which we trusted the government. How will that look like? We would say, we have a crisis, we're opening our data, here's the data, use it in any way you can, we want to reduce things. Every day I'll tell you about my symptoms, we report all of those things. It's a common effort. It is crazy that we don't share this data. Just think about how much better we could have been if we all shared that data. But we don't trust the government. We say, we'll give you the data now, you'll never release it, you'll find out all kind of things about us, you'll use it against us. So we are stuck in a bad equilibrium. We're stuck in equilibrium with no trust and no value. But of course, we could have had a much, much better situation. I actually think that COVID-19 could have been a case where government could, in principle, have gained lots of trust. But sadly, when you look at many governments around the world, you look at the US, you look at Brazil, you look at Israel, you look at Russia, those are the main failing points in my mind right now. I think the crisis has actually decreased trust rather than being used as a way to benefit and increase trust. So let me summarize. This crisis is going to be with us for a long time. I wish it wasn't, but it's going to be with us for a long time. We don't know how long the virus will be with us, and we don't understand how long the financial crisis that will follow. But even if there was a cure today, the financial crisis is going to stay for a while. And the question is, how are we going to get out of this? And it's one of those cases where just waiting for things to go back to normal is not a good strategy. We have to take actions. And when we have to take actions, we have to think about how do we help human nature? How do we get instincts for preservation, for fear, myopic thinking, hyperbolic discounting? How do we get those instincts not to hurt us? In this time, it is easy for people to try to lock themselves in, to stay afraid. It's easy for people not to go to medical exams. It's easy for people who have money not to spend it. It's easy for people not to help others. It's easy to reduce trust. But all of those instincts are not the right ones. If we hope to get out of this crisis in the short time possible, and it will be long anyway, but try to shorten it, we have in some way to work against our instincts. We have to work on fear and anxiety and loneliness, and we have to work on how to get people to think long term, but at the same time not take loans that they can't repay. We have to increase the public good. We have to get people to start supporting their local economy, and of course we have to deeply work on increasing trust in each other, in local governments, in federal governments. Are we going to take these steps? I'm not sure. We're trying, and I'm not sure. Okay, so this was a slightly depressing talk. Maybe I'll add 2 points that I think are bright points. One is that I told you in the beginning that the success of education, as far as I could see it, were in the places where autonomy was given to principals, teachers, parents, and kids. And I think that if we take those lessons seriously, we start creating educational systems that increase autonomy, I think there'll be one winner from this. I think that in 10 years from now, the education system could be one that principals, teachers, parents, and kids get autonomy, and kids will find their own passion, and the education system will be very, very different and very, very good. That's one. The second winner, I think, is going to be the healthcare system. And I don't mean regular hospitals. I mean that we are realizing that telemedicine is incredibly important. Realizing that community hospitals are incredibly important. Hospitalization at home is incredibly important. We have the technology to start distributing those things. So, lots of darkness, lots of deep need to understand human nature, but maybe education and health are going to win from this crisis. And for now, I'll bid you farewell, and I hope that together we'll be able to take some positive steps and maybe reduce a little bit the length and the depth of this crisis. All the best.